Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. I'm Alex, and today we're back with a bonus video where we're going to be looking at the first Unearthed Arcana of the 2024 rules. The Artificer in Unearthed Arcana has been released just a couple days ago, and we're going to go through and look at what's new, what's changed, but really get down into the gritty of the subclasses. I'm not going to focus too much on the main Artificer. I want to focus more on the subclasses and what they have to offer, of course, particularly Alchemist, just because I find that those will be interesting, especially when it may come to builds in the future. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty much just sharing what's new and updated or potentially going to be updated, because this is Unearthed Arcana. It's all playtest material. None of it is actually official, but we're going to go through it. I'll share my thoughts. I'll share what I like, what I dislike, that sort of thing. And it's just going to be a chill little video here. Definitely let me know what you guys think of more review videos like this, as well as the Artificer itself, of course. I'm curious as to what the vibes are for the Artificer going into 2024, given that there's a lot of room that the design team over at Wizards of the Coast has to play with, and clearly they've taken some steps in some directions, but maybe not as many as they could have. So let's jump into it. Scrolling down, we can see the little jot notes and of the Artificer updates. I'm pretty much just going to go based off of these, and I will talk a little bit more about a couple of them in depth, since these are just brief summaries. But let's go over what they have here, and then we'll actually jump down to the parts that I want to talk about. For the changes, Magical Tinkering, their first level ability, has been swapped, and it now allows the Artificer to craft low-cost items very quickly. You can see it right here. Basically, as a magic action, they can just make items from the below list. Obviously, this is probably going to be more out-of-combat utility than anything else, though it is kind of cool that just as a magic action, they can plant some caltrops that they don't even have on them and didn't pay for right next to them. Or the same thing with ball bearings or oil. I like the more support for those basic adventuring gear items that wasn't really around in the previous rules. The caveat to Magical Tinkering is that there is a limited number of uses based on your intelligence modifier, and the item only lasts an hour, so you can't just infinitely make these items and then sell them. As far as other changes goes, for spell casting, the Artificer is now able to change one cantrip after each long rest. That's kind of nice because it gives them a little bit more versatility. Infuse item had a big redesign, where it is now pretty much completely different. It is now called Replicate Magic Item, and it allows you to do exactly that. You replicate a magic item. Before, Replicate Magic Item was its own infusion, and then you had other infusions, which were basically Artificer unique magical weapons. They changed this, and at the end of the Unearthed Arcana, we will see it, where those old infusions are actually now just going to be straight up magic items that anyone could technically get, but an Artificer could still make through Replicate Magic Item. We can see Magic Item Tinker now replaces Tool Expertise and instead lets you turn a magic item into a spell slot. So we have a little bit more versatility there if we wanted more spell casting rather than magic items. Flash of Genius is now used in response to an ability check or saving throw failing. That's pretty good, since before I think you had to use it. You didn't get to know whether or not you did fail or succeed. Basically now we know whether or not we actually need to use it, or to try and use it. Spell storing item has been changed to include level 3 Artificer spells. That's pretty nice, could be helpful if you were playing a higher level Artificer that of course has access to those. As a half caster, it's going to take you it's going to take you some time before you can actually get there. And Soul of Artifice, their capstone, actually had some pretty good quality of life improvements. It's no longer a reaction to cheat death, and instead of dropping you to 1 hit point, it drops you to 20 hit points. There are also some other features, but we'll talk about that once we get to there. So looking at the Artificer now, we obviously talked about Magical Tinkering. We can see here that plans known in magic items are basically similar to what the infusions were previously, but if I scroll down even further, we can see that it is a full list, and you are basically learning these different items similar to how a Battle Master picks their maneuvers. The one thing I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions on is how you like them flipping this from unique infusions with replicate magic item to replicate magic item and then having the infusions be extra magic items. Do you think it's a step in the right direction to tie the actual magic items of the standard magic items of D&D to the Artificer, or is it a step in the wrong direction? In my mind, I can see what they're doing here. They're wanting to make it so that the Artificer actually interacts more with the magic items that are presented in, like, the Dungeon Master's Guide. The major drawback to that, though, is that the Artificer has to rely a lot on what is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Unless they plan on reprinting a bunch of these items in whatever supplement actually contains the Artificer, it's kind of annoying that you would have to pick up 2 separate books in order to be able to use them. Or even if you used this Unearthed Arcana version of the Artificer, you still need to have the versions of the books available to you. I say this as someone who has the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide already. I would obviously buy most books that Wizards of the Coast prints out just to have the options available, but that's just me. That's not everybody, and I can see it being a real pain. Now we can go down to Drain Magic Item here. Drain Magic Item got its rework, of course, that we looked at, and now what it says is as a bonus action, we can touch a magic item that is within 5 feet of ourselves. So if we did hand an item off to an ally, we'd have to run over and slap them on the back if they're wearing our magic armor or something like that. But we can then cause the item to vanish, converting its magical energy into a spell slot. The spell slot is level 1 if it's a common or uncommon, if it is a common, or it's level 2 if the item is uncommon or rare. Even though I was more joking when I said we would have to run over and slap our ally on the back, technically that is true. This rule really assumes that the Artificer is at least, I'd say 60 to 80% selfish with their magical item. Because in order to get these spell slots back, we have to break those items. So if we make 2+1 shields for like our 2 frontline tank characters, because they both happen to be sword and board, all of a sudden they have our magic items, we have to get to them, destroy those magic items, and then we get the spell slot back. There would need to be a very good reason as to why we would have to do that in order to make it worth our while, because our allies are losing a big chunk of a boost that we gave to them. We'll go on to Flash of Genius though. It's pretty much the same like we had looked at, but of course it does have that change to now be contingent on a failed ability check or saving throw, as opposed to before. Spell storing item, when we finish a long rest, we can touch a simple or martial weapon or a spell casting focus to store a spell in it. The spell can be 1st, 2nd, or 3rd level. And then Soul of Artifice. We have 2 features now in Soul of Artifice. Cheat Death, as we said, got a really nice rework where if we drop to 0 hit points, we can just get rid of a common or rare magic item created by us in order to go to 20 hit points instead of 0. That's not too bad. But Magical Guidance is another ability that has been reworked, and it says while you have attunement to at least 1 magical item, you can add 1d6 to any ability check that you make. You can decide to add the die after rolling the d20, and you can use this benefit only once per turn. But essentially, at level 20, our big capstone isn't just that we are harder to kill when we have magic items, it's that we also get a passive, like bardic inspiration, enhance ability, bless, that sort of skill boosting ability. But it does reinforce the more skill monkey aspect of being an Artificer. The spell list updates, this is the last thing we'll talk about in the major Artificer before jumping down to the subclasses. We have a few updates. They now have the cantrips of Elementalism and True Strike. They also have Arcane Vigor now, as well as Dragon's Breath and Homunculus Servant. This is no longer an infusion, it is actually a spell that all Artificers just have access to. We'll take a look at that because there is some neat stuff that we can do there, but it isn't necessarily the greatest spell ever. But it is similar to the Homunculus Servant infusion, it's just that it is now a spell slot instead. And then at level 5 we get Circle of Power as well. Alright. First up, the Alchemist, the big one that people really wanted to see have some major improvements. And it did get some, but in all honesty, I was hoping for a little bit more. It did not live up to my expectations in terms of this Unearthed Arcana. Hopefully, there'll be some more feedback to Wizards and they'll actually take that and run with it and maybe boost it up a little bit more. But for what it's worth, let's look at what they got. From the overview of what they have, as far as their spells go, Blight got swapped out with Vitriolic Sphere, so whether that's good or not good, I'll leave that up to you. Tool proficiency now allows Artificers to craft potions faster. This falls in line with more of that Artificers are the item crafter character class, / they are the Dungeon Master's Guide character class. All Artificer subclasses are going to have this effect for their respective favorite item. So Alchemist has it with potions, whereas the Artillerist has wands, I believe. Essentially, just like 2014 Wizards, they are good at their specific niche thing. It's just that that niche thing is directly tied to DMG crafting rules. Experimental Elixir had a big revamp. It now produces more elixirs. The healing of the healing elixir has increased. In fact, it has doubled. And the 6th row of the table now lets you choose an elixir's effect, which is pretty nice. So you have a little bit more consistency over what type of elixir you would like to have. What it doesn't say there is also that the elixirs are now a bonus action to drink or administer, which they were not before. Restorative Reagents has been changed to connect the temporary hit points to our level. Instead of like rolling and adding our intelligence modifier for the temporary hit points when an ally drinks the elixir, they now just get a flat number equal to our level plus intelligence modifier. So that's really awesome. And finally, Chemical Mastery, their capstone, has been completely reworked. It now adds extra damage, extra resistances, and a free casting of Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron. First up, tool proficiency. We get our special tool proficiency, and we also are able to brew a potion in half the regular time. The regular time, following the magic item crafting time and cost, is actually half of what is shown here. This is for actual magic items, how long it takes to craft them. Then we can see here that the time and cost are halved for consumable items besides spell scrolls. So that would include potions, meaning that a common potion typically takes 2.5 days to craft. For an alchemist, it's going to be half of that again. So that's pretty nice. Since it says follow the crafting rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, we can see that the Artificer is being very much pushed towards being connected to the DMG. Down to Experimental Elixir. So we can see that right off the bat, we start by being able to make 2 elixirs, and this will actually increase once we hit level 5. It goes up to 3 elixirs per long rest, 4 at level 9, 5 at level 15. So the amount of elixirs we can passively make does scale. That's great. Creating additional elixirs, though, does not. It's a magic action while holding alchemist supplies to create an extra elixir. It still costs a spell slot, but we get to choose the effect. However, the higher level the spell slot does not do anything for us, and the elixirs themselves don't scale based off of level or spell slot or anything else. As a bonus action, a creature can drink the elixir or administer it to another creature within 5 feet of itself. That's really awesome, especially for our action economy. And jumping back up now to the types of elixirs, we've got our healing, our swiftness, resilience, boldness. All those are the exact same. The only one that has changed is healing. It went from 2d4 to 2d8. But then 6, which used to be the alter self one, that's now gone. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I personally don't really know. I never really used it, but at the same time, I could see that it was I could see it being a fan favorite. It's now gone, and instead you just get to choose your elixir if you roll a 6. So you have a 1/3 chance of getting the elixir that you really want, but you might not know what you want, and so you might be okay just rolling the die and seeing what happens. Alchemical Savant is the exact same as in 2014. Restorative Reagents is the exact same as well, besides the little change. Chemical Mastery is the new revamped capstone, where now with Alchemical Eruption, we do 2d8 force damage once per turn when we deal our favorite damage types, so acid, fire, necrotic, or poison. We also gain flat out resistance to acid and poison damage, which is okay, and we can use Conjured Cauldron. We can cast Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron without expending a spell slot, without preparing the spell, and without spending material components. provided we use the Alchemist supplies as the spellcasting focus. That's pretty cool. Well, I want to talk about healing, because honestly, with this little change to the elixirs, specifically looking at the healing elixir here, the Alchemist is now one of, if not the best, burst healers in the game. The reason for this is, admittedly, if we were to take advantage of our homunculus servant or a familiar that maybe we pick up through a warlock dip. So homunculus servant is now a spell, no longer just a regular infusion like I had said, and what we get from it is that it has a casting time of an hour, or as a ritual. That's really long, but its duration is infinite since it's instantaneous, so our homunculus servant will always be around until it dies. It is a 2nd level spell, so it'll only have 15 HP. It's essentially a familiar. It's just a really expensive familiar because it has a material component requirement that is worth 100 GP. That gets consumed. That is, in my mind, ridiculously expensive. But if we can make it happen, it actually might be worth our while having a homunculus servant that is like a little med bot. The reason is, like a familiar, they can use channel magic. You can cast a spell that has a range of touch while they're within 120 feet of us, and as a reaction, the homunculus servant delivers that spell with their reaction. So, if we were to set up a little bit for a healer build, maybe grab like a free casting of Cure Wounds or the healer feat, we'd be able to do quite a bit. Let's pretend for the sake of argument that we have a homunculus servant here or a pixie familiar from like a 1-level warlock dip, right? We can have our familiar or our servant get next to an ally. Then we could cast Cure Wounds or potentially do a free casting. We can have the familiar or servant use its reaction to deliver the spell, since it has a range of touch, to that ally. Then, if we were able to use a free casting for Cure Wounds, or if we have a free casting for Healing Word, we could use a bonus action to cast Healing Word on that ally as well, or a separate one. After we've done that, and we've used both our action and our bonus action, we can command our familiar or the servant to administer an elixir, assuming that we have loaded them up with at least a couple of our healing elixirs. We can see down in the combat rules here that the homunculus is an ally to us and our allies, and in combat it shares our initiative count, but it takes its turn immediately after ours, but it obeys our commands with no action required by us. That really helps save us some action economy, given that we can command it to take a bonus action. It doesn't have any bonus actions innately, but it is allowed to take bonus actions provided by other sources, such as our elixir, and being able to administer that elixir to an ally. The familiar, on the other hand, and the reason I bring them up, is because they actually have their entire own turn. It potentially could be better to have one of those running around the battlefield with your elixirs on hand to administer to allies as a bonus action as part of their turn. And the other nice thing is that as a flat magic action, we can recast our familiar if it dies, whereas the homunculus servant is taking a long time to come back. The Alchemist was a pretty reasonable healer before, but I like that it has even more potential burst healing now, just because its action economy has gotten a little more freed up. But honestly, that's only considering healing. This doesn't even take into account the action economy that we have with our other potions now. We could run up, and if we had picked up Bless through a Fate or something else, we could cast Bless on an ally, and then feed them a Boldness potion, making it so that they are free on their turn to use their action, bonus action, whatever else, to go absolutely nuts with their 2d4s. Same thing with the Resilience potion. We could run up to an ally on the front lines, bonus action, feed them the Resilience potion, run away, and give them that +1 AC before their turn comes around, and they would actually have to spend a bonus action to do it. Enemies might end up going between our turn and our ally's turn, and they may need that +1 AC. Honestly, I do like that change, even if it doesn't feel like much. Alright, the second thing I want to touch on is Chemical Mastery. Really, this is just a little quick gripe. Alchemical Eruption, 2d8 force damage to a target based on their favorite damage type. I wish this was AoE. Personally, I think the Alchemist should be an AoE or damage over time damage dealer. It just makes sense in my mind. If any of you have played Bloons Tower Defense 6, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But thematically, it feels like the Alchemist should be a character that deals either AoE damage from lobbing like vials of acids and poisons at their enemy, or they should deal damage over time. They hit the enemy with that vial, and then it starts to melt them and degrade them. The force damage, I can see what they're going for here. It's like you're exploding the vial onto that enemy, and it's dishing out some force damage. But really, it would be nice if that had at least like a 5-foot area of effect. Besides that, the one other thing I'll go back to talk about for damage is in Alchemical Savant. It still only affects spells. I honestly wish that was changed a little bit, just because they put in a fair amount of work in the player's handbook rules to revamp adventuring gear like Alchemist Fire and Acid Flasks, among other things. I feel like our Alchemical Savant feature should apply to items like that. It would be so nice if we just had flat bonuses to any type of that elemental damage, whether it's acid, fire, necrotic, or poison. If it wasn't tied to just spells, that I think would be thematically cool. I just think it would be a nice little addition. Finally, Conjured Cauldron. It lets us cast Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron, which is a 6th level spell. The spell is kind of interesting. It's basically like a free team potion generator. You cast it as an action, so you can do it in combat. It does require a 500 GP ladle, but as an alchemist, we can ignore that material component, so that's nice. And it'll last for 10 minutes, so it could last like in the middle of a fight. When you create it, it duplicates an effect of a common or uncommon potion. Not necessarily the greatest at high level play, level 15 we are level 15 after all when we're getting this alchemist feature. However, given that it can pump out a number of potions equal to your spellcasting ability modifier, this means that odds are you're giving every member of your party one of these potions. Now, to show off what potions we actually have access to, let's look at the potions in the 2024 DMG. These are rare, but if I go up here, we can see the uncommon potions. We have Animal Friendship, Fire Breath, Hill Giant Strength, Potion of Growth, which is actually probably my favorite. You get the Enlarge effect of the Enlarge Reduce spell for 10 minutes, no concentration required. Giving that type of effect to your entire party is actually kind of reasonable. Maybe it should have come online a little bit earlier than level 15, maybe not, but it is at least a neat extra effect. Okay, time to go on to Armorer. Armorer, honestly, I was not expecting to have the changes that it did. Let's just jump right into it. Tools of the trade, you craft armor faster, same as we saw with the Alchemist, just for armor since that's our shtick. Armor model, we have a new armor option, the Dreadnought. In addition to the Guardian as well as the Infiltrator, there's now just a third random armor model, which I don't know if anyone was really asking for personally. I never felt like it was missing, but we'll get to it, and it is very cool, I will say. Armor modifications has been replaced by a new feature, Armor Replication. This, honestly, is a bit of a nerf. We'll see why when we get to it. And then Perfected Armor now increases the damage of both Thunder Gauntlets as well as Lightning Launchers. It also increases the Dreadnought's damage, but we'll talk about that in a sec. For Arcane Armor, there's a very, very subtle change here, and that is that donning or doffing it requires a Utilize action. There is a very niche case where a Thief Rogue who multi-classes can now armor up or armor off as a bonus action. Pretty cool, but again, pretty niche. So, looking at the armor models now, we can see right off the bat, the first one is the new one, and it is the Dreadnought. And honestly, let's start with this because this also has some changes for the other ones. We can see that the Dreadnought has an armored flail. It is a big iron ball on a chain that appears on one of our gauntlets and has the following traits. It's a simple melee weapon. It deals a d10 bludgeoning plus the ability modifier of the attack roll, and it has the reach property. In addition, the Dreadnought has the two following features. As a bonus action, we can transform and enlarge our armor for 1 minute. For the duration, our reach increases by 5 feet. So with a regular weapon, you have 5-foot reach. Reach weapon, you're 10 foot. As soon as we become size large, we're now up to 15 feet. So that's a really large amount of reach. And of course, following the usual rules, if there's not enough room to change our size, that doesn't change. But we can use this bonus action a number of times equal to our intelligence modifier. We also have Wrecking Ball. If we hit a creature that is at least 1 size smaller than us with the flail, we can push the creature up to 10 feet straight away from yourself or pull the creature up to 10 feet towards ourselves. We have a Scorpion Get Over Here type of build or a push enemies away from us type of build. That's really neat. The other really nice thing is that they have officially made each of the armorer's armor weapons simple melee weapons. This is a great quality of life improvement for allowing it to interact with other features. If you saw my Wrecking Ball video from a few weeks ago, I talked about how the spiked armor in the Battle Ragers kit don't count as simple melee weapons, at least not rules as written, or it's worded weird. Because of that, they miss out on a lot of other neat features. This finally lets these weapons get around that, and we can have different features like Gift of the Chromatic Dragon that could boost the weapon damage. So that's a really nice quality of life improvement as is. Each armor model has its own unique weapon, of course. It has a base feature, and then it has a pseudo weapon mastery of the weapon. So the armor flail has the Wrecking Ball. The Guardian down here, we can see has its traits, everything we're used to. It has Distracting Pulse as its weapon mastery. When we hit the creature with the gauntlet, they have disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone other than us until the start of our next turn. And they also did change defensive field here, I should mention. Instead of a limited number of uses, it's now an infinite number of uses, but you have to be bloodied. I actually kind of like this change. I don't know how you guys would feel about it, but honestly, I think it's really neat and could lead to an interesting build that is meant to be like a pure berserker that wants to drop down below half health to just continuously pump themselves full of temporary hit points. Lastly, we can go to the Infiltrator. Everything we've seen before, honestly, they didn't change Infiltrator at all. We get the Gem Light Node. It is a simple ranged weapon. It deals a d6 lightning damage plus the ability modifier used for the attack roll. Has the same range of 90/30 feet. The property, though, is actually different. That is an interesting catch. It now has the Throne property, meaning that as a simple range, meaning it is effectively a dart. It can benefit from the archery fighting style because it's a simple ranged weapon, but it can also benefit from the thrown weapon fighting style, so that's kind of neat too. We also see that once on a turn when we deal damage with the lightning launcher, we can deal an extra 1d6 damage again. Our speed still increases by 5 feet, and of course we have advantage on stealth checks, or that cancels out with disadvantage. Going down to armor replication, so what was the nerf that they had here? Well, instead of being like the full suit of armor, it gets divided into like a helmet, a breastplate, boots, gauntlets, that sort of thing. It's now just you get one extra magic item plan / replication, and that extra one that you get has to be armor, just flat out. Though the other benefit, technically, is that you actually don't have to put the extra armor that you get into your arcane armor. You just get one free replicate magic item plan and item to use, but technically they could be two different things. They just both have to be from the armor category. So that's kind of interesting. Finally, down in level 15, perfected armor, everything gets a big boost to their damage. The Dreadnought goes from a d10 with their flail to 2d6. And their reach increases by 10 feet, but also their size can increase to huge, which is pretty nuts. They also gain a flying speed as if they didn't gain enough. But honestly, right off the bat, I want to point out that because you can become size huge with this Dreadnought feature, that means you could also become size gargantuan with the enlarge reduce spell. So that's really cool too. The Guardian is the exact same thing. We get our reaction pull if a creature comes near us, but also our gauntlets become a D10 instead of 1D8. And finally, the Infiltrator, their lightning launcher goes to 2d6 as well, just like it used to. Plus, if you hit an enemy, that creature sheds dim light in a 5-foot radius, and it actually has disadvantage on attack rolls against us. In addition, the next attack roll against it has advantage. They did change that. So now, instead of the next attack roll having advantage with the Infiltrator's weapon, it just provides disadvantage for that enemy to hit you. So much more selfish rather than team-based. Down to the Artillerist now. Honestly, I looked through this. I looked diligently, as far as I can tell, for a change, and I couldn't really find anything that was super unique or new besides what's just listed here. So we'll just go through this and then maybe skim through what they have. But honestly, all the changes are the tool proficiency. We craft wands in half the time, same as the other guys again. Eldritch Cannon now allows each cannon to use the flamethrower, force ballista, and protector options instead of just when you make it, you have to make like the flamethrower or you have to make the protector. You can now switch it up. So that admittedly is a really neat change that gives a lot of versatility. Explosive Cannon also now detonates as a reaction instead of an action, and its damage has been increased. So there's a little bit of a buff too. Arcane Firearm, looking at it here, it's the exact same. There's no real changes in this feature at all, which I honestly think is a little unfortunate given that they made guns and firearms like a core part of the 2024 rules. I think they could have done something there that would have been neat, but oh well. Level 9, Explosive Cannon, so the detonate feature instead of an action, it's just when it's reduced to 0 hit points, we can take a reaction, not it, but we take the reaction to command it to detonate. Doing so will deal 3d10 to everyone within 20 feet of it. That's a bit of an increased range if I'm not mistaken as well. Looking at it here, Explosive Cannon, nope, same amount of range, but it's 3d10 instead of 3d8, so a little boost to it, not a whole lot. Fortified Position, exact same thing. We can create 2 cannons with the same magic action. We can command them with the same bonus action, but we can't have a third cannon. And there's no need to make them different cannons this time because every cannon can do everything. So that's all right. As well, you and your allies have half cover while within 10 feet of an Eldritch Cannon. That's also pretty nice. And finally, last is the Battlesmith. Battlesmith, honestly, not a whole lot of changes. I personally wasn't expecting it to have a lot of changes, but just because it did seem like a pretty okay workhorse. But for what it's worth, let's go through it. Tool proficiency, you can craft weapons faster. Weapons are your shtick, that's nice. And Steel Defender, its HP and force empowered rend have been adjusted. That's it. We can see all the same spells. Battle Ready, same thing. You can use intelligence instead of strength or dex for attack and damage rolls with magic weapons specifically. You're proficient in martial weapons. And then we get down to our Steel Defender. Still a bonus action to command, but otherwise it acts on our turn. We can look down and restoring it. We can take a magic action, touch it, expend a spell slot in order to restore it to life after 1 minute if it were to be destroyed. So down here we can go to Force Empowered Rend and see that its damage is now a d8 plus 2 plus our intelligence modifier, whereas before it was a d8 plus proficiency bonus. And that was it. We have 3 uses of repair per day where we can get back 2d8 hit points for our Steel Defender as an action. This is pretty much the same as well. It was 2d8 plus proficiency bonus on the old version, and here it's plus intelligence modifier, so similar scaling. Technically the proficiency bonus is a little bit better since you don't have to improve intelligence, but improving our intelligence is what we want to do anyways. And of course, also, there's no guarantee our intelligence is going to get to 6, whereas there is technically a guarantee that if you play long enough, your proficiency bonus gets to 6. Our HP is also 5 plus 5 times our Artificer level, whereas before it was 2 plus intelligence modifier plus 5 times our Artificer level. So this is much simpler, just 5 plus 5 times level, nice and easy. We get extra attack as normal. Arcane Jolt has just been laid out a little bit nicer. We hit a target with an attack roll, or when the Steel Defender hits the target, we can either do Destructive Energy to deal 2d6 extra force damage, or choose a creature within 30 feet of the target. That creature regains 2d6 hit points. And then finally, Improved Defender. The Arcane Jolt again becomes 4d6, that's the same. The Steel Defender's extra +2 AC. And then finally, whenever our Steel Defender uses its Deflect attack, the attacker takes force damage equal to 1d4 plus our Intelligence modifier. That is the exact same as well. All right, so we looked at the Homunculus Servant. We sort of touched on it in the Alchemist and how it could be used there, but it is now technically a flat out spell that only the Artificer gets access to, but all Artificers do have access to it for free. It's a level 2 spell, and I really think the cost is really steep, honestly. 100 GP each time you go to cast it, with the Homunculus Servant having only like 15 hit points when you first get it. That's a really, really weak summon, so you're definitely not using this to like attack in combat, but even trying to have it run around the battlefield as a heal bot is kind of disincentivized given how easily it can die. So either hopefully we're able to become rich and use it as a heal bot, or might just not use it at all. But personally, that's what I want to do with it. I would love to make a Homunculus Servant medbot that just follows us around the battlefield, helping us treat and triage our allies. That would be so cool. Magic items, we have those big changes I sort of touched on really early on in the actual Artificer, looking at the base Artificer, where we're talking about how the old infusions are now magic items. So the magic items presented here appeared as Artificer infusions in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but now as magic items, they can be created using the Artificer's Replicate Magic Item feature, but they can also be found as treasure or crafted using the Dungeon Master's Guide. And as far as the other magic weapons, yeah, these other magic items, yeah, they are all the old infusions. Boots of the Winding Path, Helm of Awareness, Mind Sharpener, Radiant Weapon, Repeating Shot, Repulsion Shield, Returning Weapon, they are all here. Overall, I think that's both good and bad. It's really cool to me that now, if I wanted to make a thrown weapon character build, I no longer technically need to rely on an Artificer in the party or multi-classing into Artificer to get a returning weapon. That's really neat. At the same point in time, these specific items were the Artificer's shtick. Like, they were their special things that they were able to bring to the table, quite literally. And now anybody can technically be an Artificer, given that every character has access to the crafting rules. Anyone can make a Mind Sharpener. Anyone can make a returning weapon or a spell refueling ring. There's no need to have an Artificer in the party, since a wizard could just make a spell refueling ring for themselves. Now their contribution is in their subclasses, and it is the overall ease of crafting. It's the ability to actually craft any item much easier and faster than any other player. Is that as unique as it was in 2014? I don't know. Again, is it the right direction or the wrong direction? Honestly, I'm torn. I think it's cool. I can see what they're trying to do, making the Artificer as a whole much more of the item character. I just wish that they were pushing the envelope a little bit more and adding in a little bit more support beyond just you're better at using the Dungeon Master's Guide rules. Because at the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily feel like a unique Artificer class. It feels like a Dungeon Master's Guide class. And yeah, that's about it. Let me know what you thought of the video, what you thought of the Unearthed Arcana, if you've gotten a chance to read it. If you don't and you have time, I'd recommend it, but obviously it's just playtest material. It's all subject to change, and really, unless you're planning on using it in a playtest, it doesn't really matter that much. And let me know if in the future you'd like to see more reaction or breakdown videos of other future Unearthed Arcana. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.